presenter this afternoon is Ian Warwick from the UK. Ian started teaching in a inner London comprehensive that was famed for being one of the most diverse schools in the UK. And Ian developed a particular interest and passion and competence working with the most able students, our gifted and talented learners. Ian went from being a teacher to leading a gifted and talented program for a whole London borough, and then for 3 London boroughs, and then was asked by the British government to set up London Gifted and Talented. So running provision for gifted students and the teachers of gifted students across the London boroughs. It's a real pleasure to introduce Ian. He has, as well as many books to his credit, he has worked with international schools around the world. He has 4 gifted children and a dog called Ruby. So, over to you. Please welcome Ian Warwick.
Thank you very much. Is this on? Yeah, you can hear it. What I wanted to talk to you about was the idea of metaphor. Now, if you look at this picture, on the side of that van, in Greek, is the word metaphor. And the reason it's there is because originally, the language of metaphor meant to take something from one place to another place. And that idea of removal van, which is what this is, taking one thing from one place to another place altogether, it's a very significant deal in our educational system, how we think about our teaching, how we think about our learning, how we think about our students, and the relationships between them. And that thinking and that practice is terribly significant in terms of how we think through the metaphors that we use. It's highly consequential. And the reason I'm saying that is it impacts pretty much on everything that we do. And we may not even know it. Metaphors tend to be kind of like a framework for us, a way of thinking about something. They're also really creative and innovative ideas as well. You pull things together using metaphor. And for me, the way we look at children is hugely significant and driven by the way we talk about teaching. Now, the quote at the top, you may well have seen before, "A mind is a fire to be kindled, not a vessel to be filled." That's what we mean about metaphor. So essentially, how are we seeing our students? Is it kindling their minds? Is it something we do that kind of sets them on fire? Or do we look at knowledge as some kind of transmission deal? Knowledge is something that's out here that we then have to transfer from our heads into their heads, the vessel to be filled. Those other ideas, those other images, I won't go through all of them, but the one on the right-hand side, for example, the pearl, and how do we get a pearl? It's normally the grit that causes the pearl. So do we see our education, do we see the way we talk about education in terms of us being the grit, the student, the pearl? And therefore our job is to make things a bit more challenging for them. There are 3 key ideas in terms of metaphors, if you like. The first one is the one around transmission, often referred to as the sage on the stage. The person who stands at the front, who's got pretty much all the information in their head, and it's for the students to kind of work out what's going on. The facilitation metaphor, which is the guide on the side. So essentially, are we the people who are supporting our students and kind of moving them in the direction we think they ought to be going? And then the final metaphor is the catalyst. Is our job basically to be an agent provocateur? So essentially, are we the person who is going to make a big difference by being controversial? Are we going to kind of make the students really start to think about what it is they wanted to do? For those at the back, it's a dog. Oh. Hello? Yeah, that one's going. It's a dog on a leash, with a mathematician and take him off the leash. Oh no, last time I did that, he almost solved Fermat's last theorem. And the idea of how much do we believe that we can let children off the leash? It's quite a risky thing to do. As a teacher, it's enormously risky. But I sincerely believe it's the most important thing that we do as well. So, even within those three metaphors, you have more. So you have the kind of idea of transmission, but are you a sculptor? Or are you a gardener? What does that mean in terms of your thinking about the students? The gardener is quite a common one. It's one that a lot of people talk about. And the aim behind it is you put the seed in the ground, you fertilize, you kind of make sure that the seed is going to grow well, and you have the plant at the end. There's an implication in that somehow it's our job really only to kind of prepare the ground around, and that the student will just become the plant anyway. They'll just grow into that. And there's kind of like almost a limited idea of how we see our students in that metaphor. It's embedded in there. Do we see ourselves as facilitators? In which case, are we really like a tour guide? Great, if you're in a town, if you're in a city, to find out what really goes on. Who's going to take you? Who's going to show you where to go? And that's us. That's us as teachers. We show our students the way. We show them all the things that we know and need. Or are you a coach? Essentially, a coach's job is far more about motivation, making sure that your students have a really kind of good sense of why they're doing what they're doing, and making very clear that their talent is the issue here, and we need to be building up who they are and what they do. Even under the catalyst one, are you kind of like a lightning rod, or are you a kind of fire starter? What is your role in terms of making sure that students move forward? There's a lot of other metaphors out there. I've seen all of these being used. Jugglers, cheerleaders, artists, foremen, scaffolders, creators, ventriloquists. Quite a few of them are quite worrying. All of them have another set of implications that sit behind it. Now, these are the four slides that I really kind of wanted you to focus on. The idea of desirable difficulty. The reason I've got the picture of a Google map, I spend a lot of time traveling, and when I'm traveling to anywhere new, essentially the first thing I do, if I'm driving, is to get the Google map out. It gives me perfect feedback. It's quite astonishing. Places I've never gone to before, and it will tell me exactly how to get there. 20 yards forward, hit the roundabout, then kind of move on, 25 miles down the motorway, turn right, suddenly I'm a god, it's almost magic. Recently going to a school in Norfolk, and it told me pretty much the entire route to get there. I park, it says now walk to the destination. The destination was on the opposite side of a 40-foot river, and there was no bridge. If I'd had the sense to look at a map just prior to that journey, one look, I would have seen that that was the case. I would have seen that actually it's on the far side. Instead, I had to go back about 20 miles to get up onto the bridge. The worry that I've got is we are seen by our students a bit like ambulatory Google. I think they view us as the kind of the expert in the room who is there to be consulted on everything. Significant worries there. The idea that we are the only experts in the room, but also huge pressure on us to be those experts all the time, and a huge demand on us all the time. I also think it's terribly unhealthy for the students. What we are doing, effectively, is we are, like the Google, we are telling them how to get where they need to go. But without the Google, they are lost. So they become enormously dependent on us to do this. That's what I mean about the power of metaphor. It's very significant how we look at ourselves and whether we believe, for example, that good feedback inevitably means that we have to tell them exactly what we're going to be doing and when they're going to do it and how they're going to do it. Research at the moment is suggesting the exact opposite. It's suggesting that too detailed feedback is actually causing damage to students. They're becoming too dependent on it. And that phrase that I've brought in there, learning only really happens when we're subjected to cognitive strain, when we need to ensure our students accept that they're supposed to think hard, pay attention, and struggle. We learn from the moments that jar, not from the moments that gel. If something is too simple, we don't remember it. And actually, through the level of difficulty, that is when students remember things. The next one, the scaffolders. We need, I think, to undermine the assumptions that students make a lot of the time. We need to reduce the safety. We need to reduce the mimicry that is happening in our schools. And if we scaffold the work too long, then essentially we are stealing the struggle from our students. They need to be able to demonstrate what they can do. And sometimes our teaching doesn't allow them to do that. And if we over-scaffold, that's one of the big problems. Complexity and doubt. So teaching to the top, going off-piste a little bit, making sure that we are there. We use a technique called most difficult first. We like to interrogate students' misconceptions, that's our job, but essentially, mistakes are going to occur, like that picture at the bottom. You know, yes, he was off-piste, and yes, he's probably ended head up, but he needs to know that that's what's going to happen to him. That actually going off-piste can cause that. But actually, those challenges and mistakes are likely to occur. We've seen them occur before, and it's safe. In our schools, it's safe. The key issue is we are not preparing students for university if we are not giving them risks. If the first time they make big mistakes as a university, they are in real trouble. Productive failure. How do we know what students know? How could we find out how high a student could jump? You put a simple stick out and you ask them to jump over. You move that stick up, there comes a point when they can't jump over. That is called the liminal moment. The liminal moment is critical in learning. If we come to the rescue of students before they reach that liminal moment, they actually don't learn. We need to be, our expertise is useful only when they are at that liminal space. We can then say to a student, okay, well, it'd be a good idea if you take a different run up or raise your knees a bit more, whatever it may be, to get over that. We can't know what they are capable of achieving unless we actually keep making it more and more tricky and difficult. These are some of the books that I've been doing recently, these last 2 or 3 years. And the one that I kind of want to talk a little bit very quickly about is that one, The Unfinished Perfection. Only reason being that Leonardo da Vinci, absolute genius, 500 years ago, he talked about unfinished perfection. And that, I think, is a really good phrase for how we need to see our own students. They are, as yet, unfinished. They are experts, but they are experts in development. And that's how we, I think, need to look at them. Okay? Thanks very much for it.
Thank you, Ian. Fascinating idea around